Another danger, and an important one in exploring psychedelics, is the danger of set and setting, the danger of not launching. See, I would say that a strong psychedelic journey is very similar in some ways, in some aspects, to the journey of taking off into space. And to get off and to get into orbit, there's an enormous amount of thrust and power that's needed to lift the rocket body, the payload in the rocket, out into space and into consciousness. And if you look at the formation of NASA or of SpaceX, you'll see that, the first several rockets and journeys were an experimental thing. There was explosions. And a great deal of the energy and the thought is in just getting out of Earth's atmosphere. And the parallel in this area is getting out of the atmosphere of the ego. The Earth, the ego, launching from that. And you want a very strong and grounded environment. You want an environment that can contain explosions. And so a great deal of the money spent is in the infrastructure to be able to have a reliable foundation. Now, this is in a couple of forms. It's the set and setting. And so, some set and settings are much more safe than others. And this is also very dependent on the individual. I would say that the important thing is that you feel completely safe. I would say this is particularly the case when exploring a new dose, a new batch, or a new substance, that you have a sense of the probability field of kind of what to expect. And there's kind of two aspects of this kind of possible risk. Because it's an unknown, you want to be humble. You want to be humble to the possibility field of all that could happen. And so, as I'm looking around at, just what's there for me today, I'm looking at things such as the fact that, as you can hear, I'm in my deck, my home. It's a relatively gentle environment. I'm not required to be anywhere or to do anything for the next 48 hours. Within the space, it's very unusual for loud noises, for major disruptions to occur. And this creates an opening. It's like creating an environment to explore that space. Another possible risk, which if you read James Orrock or Terence McKenna or what's his name, Martin Ball, these are three of the pioneers that are kind of exploring major launches out into consciousness. And a common theme and a common question is a want you to consider the psychedelic voyage as the birth of a new identity, of a new form of consciousness, that the you that you will meet in a deep journey, and it's sometimes hard to predict what will be a deep journey, what will be the most meaningful journey for you, but it's safe to say that your consciousness will meet a part of itself that you within this culture has never met before. Number two, that this consciousness will have very little to do with the life that you have lived before, because it is new. You're looking through new observing and measuring devices. You're looking through you're looking at reality not only from new observing and measuring devices, but from a different vantage point. Maybe out of the body, maybe from a part of yourself that is beyond the ego identity. Because you have the ego identity, which is simply the memory and the programming of everything that this body has been through until this moment of time in history. That's what you is defined by. This is my memory, this is my belief, this is my thought, based on everything that I've read, everything that's happened to me, everything I remember, everything I focused on, everything that was done to me. But now you're having a new experience that is not bound inherently to any of that. And so now you have a dual perception. You still have, no matter how far out you go, no matter how much you diverge. Very much, if you can imagine your consciousness as a ship, and it's been going this way and this way and this way, and had all these different events leading off, and there's all these choice points in consciousness. You encounter school, you encounter a belief, you encounter a societal model, you encounter a philosophical model, you encounter a meditative model, you encounter a political model, an economic model, and these are all models. They just happen to be the model that the majority of people around you have agreed to explore at this moment in time. But this is by no means the only model. There have been roughly 10,000 models of culture and language and history in our human history on just this planet. But your consciousness is capable of so much more. Your consciousness is capable of developing a sense of identity based on any model at all throughout history. And what is going to be created is a new model. Not to the degree that you go out, the model that is the model of your past. Now this is going to give birth to a new sense of self. This is the most potent and powerful possibility of a shamanic or psychedelic journey that truly transcends the self, is that you will become aware of yourself in a way that is not bound to anything. Now this is exactly why it is taboo, why it is beyond the pale. Beyond the pale, the wall that the Irish that was occupied by Great Britain used to separate the traditional Catholic religion between the fairy worshippers, the pixies, the wild hedonists of the untamed Irish spirit, that this was what was beyond what was considered rational. This is explored nicely in Graham Hancock's book on the supernatural. I think it's called Supernatural Journeys or something. Look it up. It's an interesting study. And the question is, you will now have these two senses of self, and what many people experience is that this sense that you have of who you are is far more real, far more relevant than anything that you've known before. That because these substances that are within the body, tryptamines are within our body. We have DMT, 5-MeO, DMT, psilocybin, etc., within our bodies. And these are the substances when people have spontaneous mystical experiences without substance. These are the chemicals within our body that induce these transcendent states, these states from which every religion has been conceived. The new path. The new path. Now, being isolated as a human animal is a traumatic event. There is nothing more frightening to the human animal than being all alone and the belief or the fear that we may be alone and lonely forever, separate, because we are a social species. And so you go out there, you have this journey. You have this journey. And now there's a you, that some part of you will say, this is who I am. All this other stuff, that's just weird mental masturbations that this culture has spun and woven out of nothing. I mean, we come up with these ideas like courtesy. It's an idea. Well, we should treat each other courteously. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means you should say please and thank you. Well, what does that mean? It means that you honor the other person's freedom. Well, what's that? Well, freedom means that nobody can tell you what to do. To do, what's that? Well, it's moving your body, not doing these other things. And we just make these stuff up. We just invent an entire world and culture through language. And then we honor certain things more than other things in any culture. Like in America, we honor individuality, independence. What does that mean? Well, independence means that you don't need anyone. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means you have your own money. Well, what's money? It's this bits of paper. Well, what's that? Well, it's this symbol we've created that says what's valuable. Well, what's valuable? Things are what's valuable. An iPhone 6 is valuable. A 1988 Nokia phone is not valuable. That's old. Well, why? Because new is good. Why? Why is new good? Because it's progress. Well, what's progress? It's scientific advancement. It's doing more things. This old phone couldn't video chat. This one can. Well, what's that? What's that? Well, it's creating within these little pixels the same sense as if you're seeing one another. What's that? You know, it's one thing after another, after another. And of course, every culture has its own biases. In some of the Asian cultures, if it's old and traditional, that's good. Why? Because that means our grandparents did it. And who's that? Those are the people that came before us. Well, why is that good? Because if it shows respect to honor them. What's honor? Well, it's to be like them. You be like them, and that's honor. Well, why is that good? Because it gives the message that you were good enough. You're not something to be changed. I see. So there's honoring tradition, and then there's new and improved. And it's all language, and it's all words, and you start to realize it's all a big synthetic manufacturing of the imagination and evolution of values and words and stuff within humankind, and you're free of that. And so you have this parallel sense of self that has perhaps nothing to do with the world you've been living. Perhaps you have a sense that if I was truly me coming into this body, I would like to be doing less. I would like to do it less efficiently and more beautifully. Well, we've all got to be efficient. No, we don't. There's a great advertising executive who gave a TED Talk about the Channel Tunnel, a multi-billion-dollar project, roughly 50 billion euros spent to build a tunnel that allows people to go from London to Paris quicker. And this is all being spent in honor of this great Western value of saving time. And the question is, do we want to save time? Well, of course, because it means we can do more business. Well, what's that? That's selling one thing to another person. And we all got to do that. Why? Because we have to make money. Why? So that we can buy happiness. Why? Because happiness is material objects, and because everything is material. Is it? Does that really buy happiness? And as the advertising executive pointed out, if rather than spending the 50 billion euros to save 40 minutes in a commute that is underground, unpleasant, dark, with no view, was instead spent to hire the best circus acts on the planet, strippers, gourmet food, 11-course meals, paintings, Monets, that 50 billion euros could buy some of the world's best art collection, number one. Could buy the world's best art collection, could stick it on elaborate conveying devices, then create the world's greatest travel experience, elevating the journey to such a level that no one would want to get off the train, that you'd want it to go at 5 miles an hour so that you could savor the art. So in short, we have many different paths that as human beings, as culture, we take to prioritize efficiency or quality. In other words, if you can create the most exquisite moment possible in a given situation, why would you want the moment to end? And yet, we can be trained in a way that prioritizes always saving time, rather than stretching out the moment and making it more beautiful. And basically, when you're outside the set, you see the absurdity of these blind spots within the culture. And the danger is that as a social species that need one another in order to belong, the danger is that we may feel completely alone. Nobody else gets it. Everyone else is bought into the program that's running here. Everyone just instinctively knows here that this is good for that reason. Everyone knows that this is the way it is because of this. But you realize that's not true at all. It could go any of 1,000 different ways, and many of them are more beautiful, more true to our hearts, our minds, our bodies than the way that we've gone. But this is very difficult for the you. We've spent 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, however old you are, doing it this way. Not only doing it this way, but believing that the way that we've been doing it is the only way to do it. And then suddenly, you have a new experience. It's like traveling. When I went to Thailand for the first time, when I went to Italy, when I went to Denmark for the first time, my eyes opened up. Because I saw, no, this is not the only way. This is just one of many ways, and this isn't even the best way. We have so much to learn from other cultures. And this is a more profound journey than any of that. So the question is, how does your and my monkey brain, the brain that's lived in this culture our whole life, how does it make sense of that upon our return? When we look at our schedule and the way that we're going to be spending our time over the next 2-3 weeks, and we see just how crazy it is relative to all the ways that we could be doing things. Can we bridge the gap? Or is that too much for our mind to grasp? So that's the danger, to feel separate. But this is also the gift. When I traveled to Denmark and saw all the ways that they were increasing the quality of life for the Danes, and I saw that without a shadow of a doubt, my quality of life would be 3 times higher being a Danish citizen than a U.S. citizen, or that my quality of life would be 3 times higher being a Thai citizen, or not even necessarily that. I would say being an American in Thailand, because the Thais have their own sets of binding rules. But that the freedom that I've been given by growing up in America to think for myself allows me to appreciate and enjoy the Thai traditions 3 times more than many of my own. The question is how to bring some of that back, and I have, whether it's looking to create more fluid ways to create massage. I mean, there I have massages on the beach for $10 a day spontaneously with people I like in a manner that's fun and enjoyable, where the structure, where what a massage therapist is different from what a massage therapist is here in terms of time, money, ambiance, location, spontaneity. It's all very, very different. And how to create some of that here. It's a journey. When I had fun sailing in the Philippines, just hopping in a little catamaran and sailing off, the joy of that, and bringing some of that back here to buy a little sailboat without a motor or whatever and just set out and launch out into the bay. It's like how to bring that back here. And when the gap is so wide that it's see, because the architecture of reality is built up by value hierarchies, number one, which are often determined by ancient survival issues, hundreds of years old, that are not operating in the present but are still governing the present. If that makes sense. Like 200 years ago, this value was really important for our country to survive, so we made that value sacred. But then today it's not helpful at all. It's getting in the way. It's kind of like, let's say we were barely making it through the winter and half of our children were dying. So having children, we've got to survive as a species to create our identity. We have to have more people. And then just a few hundred years later, it's like, there's too many people. But having more children is still sacred from the past. It's not connected to the present. And we're not thinking about it. And so, as you come in and realize what's sacred to me now, without all this overlay, it's completely different. And how do you bridge the gap, starting with value hierarchies, starting with paradigms, starting with interpretation, starting with cultural overtones? You build all the way up into the present moment, to the ways that we each spend our money and our time, and what we learn and how we learn it and how we apply it for what reason. You can create an entirely new architecture. And it's at this point that we feel, as a probability field, there's a high probability that we will feel insane. That because we are the only one who is connected with ourself in the moment without any of this overlay, and that this is so different, and that people can't even understand the difference, because in order to understand the difference, they'd have to go all the way back down through the mental, emotional, and psychological architecture, starting with value hierarchies. Like, we all value honesty, we all value fun. But one person values fun more than honesty, another person values honesty more than fun. The reality that's built up from those two different positions in a dualistic world where we sometimes have to decide whether to be more honest or whether to have fun. Sometimes we must decide that in a dualistic world where we can only do one thing, and one thing would be more fun and dishonest, and one thing would be more honest and less fun. What do we build out of that moment? And this is a profound choice point. Now, once a value has been buried and become an assumption, a default assumption without analysis, you can build off, and something that seems completely obvious to one person is complete insanity to someone else. So how do you build the gap? Is your mind strong enough to understand this divergent path? And the answer to this is reading, philosophy, Plato, Socrates, because these are human challenges that have been wrestled with by philosophers, by psychonauts throughout the ages. So reading Terence McKenna, reading James Orrock, The Tryptamine Palace, reading Martin Ball, watching YouTube videos. Now, this is not going to tell you your path, not at all. But what it's going to do is it's going to bring you into a circle where you realize you are not alone. You, like every pioneer before you, are wrestling with the challenge and the tension between the past and the present, the future and the present, between you and your individual sense of what's right and everyone else's sense of what's right, at a deep level. And you're not going to want to take their path, my path, anyone else's path. But you will realize that everyone who's come to this point has felt on the edge of sanity, has felt to some degree isolated from other human beings. And that's part of this journey. And if you don't want to go into that stratosphere, that stratospheric level that people who have been to the moon as our closest parallel feel, where somehow they've had an experience that is singular to maybe 12 people on the planet. Singular. That no one else can fully relate to it. If you don't want to risk that position, you don't want to take these substances. But if you do, you may require the circle of information that fills in the gap, where you feel completely alone and completely isolated. And now you realize, no, you are just one of thousands, of a small minority of people throughout human history who has always gone out to the edge. And if you are fortunate, come back and brought gifts from that truth and that dimension into this truth and this dimension, from that consciousness to this consciousness, and that every stage of human evolution throughout more than 100,000 years, throughout the cave dwellers who stumbled across psychedelic substances by accident or by guidance and started creating art and language that was different than living in the trees as monkeys, that this is how human evolution has always begun, is by going somewhere, finding a gift, and then figuring out if you're fortunate enough to return. Because it's never a totally safe journey, mentally, emotionally, or physically. It's never. When Columbus set off across the ocean looking for the Indies, it's that kind of situation. He didn't find India. He found America. But it was as unknown and as big in an unfamiliar place as India ever was. And that is the kind of journey that you're embarking on. It needs respect, it needs preparation, it needs a strong mental, emotional, physical constitution in some way. It needs a choice, and then you're going to need help. Help from your guides. If you're taking an entheogen and you connect with a sense of divinity, you will need help to embrace and receive that gift. And you will need help by learning humbly from those who have gone before. You're not crazy. You're in another state of identity and consciousness, and you're learning how to bring that back here. Good luck.